possessed a charm that compensated for a somewhat equine homeliness. He caught the attention of George Wythe, whose law office had once produced Thomas Jefferson and John Marshall, and he spent 4 years as Wythe's secretary before studying law with Virginia's Attorney General. For an ambitious young man, however, Richmond's entrenched gentry constituted a barrier to rapid advancement. When his mother and stepfather moved to Kentucky, Clay went with them. From Lexington, he was appointed to the U.S. Senate in 1806 at the age of 29, a year younger than the age stipulated in the Constitution. Clay was already a tall and rangy campaigner with every talent to assure success. When he switched legislative chambers 5 years later, his nervy vitality led to a unique honor. On the first day of his first session in the House of Representatives, Clay was elected its Speaker. Now, 13 years later, Clay, at 47, was still finding men eager for his all-night card games and women for kisses from his generous mouth. Clay understood both his appeal and the reticence that Americans expected from their politicians. "Kissing's like the presidency," he said. "It's not to be sought and not to be declined." Assessing the United States as the presidential election approached, Clay had been convinced that 1824 was destined to be his year. The percentage of Americans living west of the Appalachians had been expanding rapidly as Congress granted land rights to settlers who made improvements on the property they claimed. The country seemed ready to turn away from the Virginians who had monopolized the presidency for the past 24 years, Monroe and before him Madison and Jefferson. As a Kentuckian now, Clay was poised to reap the benefit of a fervor along the frontier for one of their own. He had already surmounted one unlikely obstacle. With his gifts so widely acknowledged in Congress, Clay had assumed that Monroe would appoint him Secretary of State, the accepted way station on the road to the presidency. Instead, inexplicably, Monroe had chosen John Quincy Adams, who had often wrangled with Clay when they served together on the peace delegation that ended the War of 1812. Adams was a New Englander and the son of the nation's second president, but he had proved his political independence from his father's Federalist Party by voting as a matter of conscience with the Jeffersonians. No one who knew John Quincy Adams would suggest that his defection from the Federalists had been prompted by political expediency, and yet when Andrew Jackson scored his improbable victory in New Orleans, the country had exploded with patriotic fervor, and the Jeffersonians became unstoppable. With the collapse of the party system, voters began to assess the personal qualities of the candidates rather than their political affiliation, a tendency that would not seem to favor the dour and unbending John Quincy Adams. When Monroe named him Secretary of State, Adams had lived abroad as a diplomat for the preceding 8 years. After representing the United States in Russia, he had gone on to the peace negotiations in Belgium, and most recently had served as America's ambassador to England. Even Adams's wife Louisa worried that returning to domestic politics in America would reinforce the grim and compulsive aspect to his nature. Despite those drawbacks, Adams's 8 years as Monroe's Secretary of State had proved successful. He took advantage of a rash and unauthorized invasion of Florida by Andrew Jackson to negotiate a treaty with Spain that expanded the boundaries of the United States west to the Pacific Ocean. Adams rightly considered his treaty a great achievement, and was chagrined when Clay found a major oversight in its original terms. The error was corrected, but Adams never forgot the way Clay had snickered over the mistake made by this man notorious for his pedantry. During his second term at the State Department, Adams had turned his attention south of the equator. He considered it America's moral duty to thwart Spanish colonialism by supporting the revolutionary movements that had sprung up throughout the hemisphere. Thomas Jefferson took a more pragmatic view. Writing to President Monroe from